Hello and welcome to the Epochs, the Lotus Eaters number 15, where Bo and I will be talking about the naval engagements of the First Punic War. Now, I really wanted to do this because I'd recently reread Polybius on this, and it strikes me that not enough is done to talk about the First Punic War anyway, because it's not nearly as cinematic as Hannibal crossing the Alps, but it was still a gargantuan conflict that absolutely rocked the Western Mediterranean. And the amount of men, materials, and money that was spent on this conflict, often totally needlessly, for what was a 26-year long war that ended in a stalemate. It doesn't sound like the sort of normal cinematic story that you get from a history reading. But there's so much that happened during the First Punic War that's just staggering, like genuine firsts in human history, especially when it came to scale, that it's really worth talking about. And the general Roman strategy is kind of laughable, and the incompetence of the Carthaginians at sea is kind of amusing. And so I thought we'd just get straight into it. Right. So, leading up, we won't be talking about the Punic War specifically. We're talking directly about the naval engagements, but I guess we'll have a very brief why are Rome and Sicily and Carthage fighting.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, so you have to take a look at sort of the strategic picture for the whole of the Mediterranean. We are talking relatively early, or depending on what your favourite period is. But I suppose, yeah. If sort of the Age of Augustus is sort of the midway point, or in my mind, often the Age of Augustus is sort of things before that are earlier, and things after that are later.
But it's the Republic Empire dichotomy, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So we're talking here. The First Punic War is 264 to 241, so it's sort of 24 years long, which is really long.
That's a hugely long. Obviously. It's a generation long.
Yeah. I mean, even Polybius does say it's among the longest wars that they had, both sides sort of win against the odds and then lose when they shouldn't have done, and there's reversals and all sorts of things, and so it drags on a lot longer than it might have done. But just strategically looking at the picture is that Carthage sort of controlled, at least in terms of commerce, a lot of the Mediterranean, the Western Mediterranean, North African coast. Yeah. And Rome, by this point, by sort of the 260s, had defeated a lot. They'd had a lot of the Italian wars, their wars of expansion, historians call them. So they defeat like the Latins, the Samnites, Greeks, Italian Celts. All sorts of people.
But so let me try and picture this. So we've got Alexander is about 80 years before, and he goes on his blazing conquest of the East.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you have the successor wars that did spill out over into Italy and Sicily through Pyrrhus, and the Romans drove him off. He fought both the Romans and the Carthaginians instantly, and then retired back to Greece. And in that period, the Romans basically consumed the southern end of Italy, but had problems with the Gauls in the north, didn't they? So they didn't. The Celts they hadn't properly subdued. They'd just won a few battles against them, but it wasn't like they'd civilized them, I guess we could say. Yeah. The Carthaginians have always been kind of involved with the Greek world because of Sicily, and so as you say, the Carthaginians operated essentially a maritime colonial empire, reasonably similar to the sort of strategy that Britain had in some ways, wasn't it? Yeah. And so, they were the dominant seafaring power, and there was literally no one else in the Western Mediterranean who'd really challenged them other than Syracuse. But even then, Syracuse was never like a great maritime power in the same way that Carthage was meant to. Right? So
I think of them a bit like the medieval Genoese or Venetians.
Yeah.
The way they've got sort of giant fleets.
Yeah.
Pretty sophisticated bureaucracy and commercial hub.
Huge
almost.
Hub, yeah.
But perhaps unlike the Genoese or the Venetians, well, also when they thought they had to, would have big armies as well. Oh, yeah. So by this point, by the time the First Punic War kicks off, they do have the Carthaginians do have lots of holdings in Spain. They control Corsica and Sardinia and the Balearics, and most of Sicily. It's really the east coast and Syracuse that they don't control. Yeah. But most of Sicily.
And large amounts of North Africa as well.
Oh, yeah, of course, sorry.
Trading
Absolutely,
posts.
All of
we
North
talk
Africa,
about Hanno
really.
the Navigator sending, settling fleet around the west coast of Africa as well. So
just hundreds of years before this. So that gives you an idea.
Yeah, the power and prestige of Carthage as a civilization.
And they would have had a giant fleet.
Yes.
And they were sort of, they were famous for having sort of cutting edge new designs of ship,
Yeah.
bigger and bigger and better ships, and all that sort of thing. And well, perhaps you could say just real quick the sources we have on this might be
Yes.
worth saying. It's Polybius is the main one.
Yeah.
Polybius, but we do have bits and bobs from others as usual. Cicero mentions it a couple of times in some of his letters. Diodorus mentions it. Dio Cassius mentions it, but it's mainly Polybius. There would have been a massive chunk of Livy, but that's lost, unfortunately.
And one of the things when I was researching this, I noticed that modern historians tend to view Polybius as the gold standard when it comes to talking about this era.
Yeah.
So fair enough.
Yeah. So a quick thing on that, just sort of a sweep, that there's the period between this 264, the start of the First Punic War, and the end of the Third Punic War, which is 146. And so
It's over 100 years.
So
120
basically,
years.
that 100 odd years, 120 odd year period, Rome goes from just being one of the dominant players in mainland Italy to the hyperpower of the Mediterranean Sea, Mediterranean world.
Yeah.
Because in the year 146, they're supposed to have sacked both Carthage, finally, completely, razed it completely to the ground, and Corinth in Greece, ending the sort of Greco-Roman Greek wars in that theatre in the same year, 146. And Polybius says that it's part of his goal, or at least his revised goal, is to chronicle all of that. Because he was at the final sacking of Carthage at the end of the Third Punic War. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realise he was
quite an old man
at the sack of Carthage.
Yeah,
Wow.
He was like an old man at that point.
Yeah, we'll talk about the sack of Carthage another time because it's one of the most brutal events of the ancient world.
Well, again, just to give a quick sort of overview, you've got this First Punic War we're going to talk about, where although there's all sorts of different places and levels and things going on, it's mainly a scrap over Sicily. The Second Punic War is sort of the famous one with Hannibal, with his elephants going across the Alps, which is the biggest of the three, easily.
It's like Carthage Strikes Back, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very...
Part 2 is like the big one,
Yeah.
with all sorts of stuff going off all over the Mediterranean. And then the Third Punic War really is just Rome going back and annihilating the city
Return
of
of the
Carthage.
Romans,
It's really that,
Yeah.
So that's sort of the sweep of events. But at this point, in the beginning of the First Punic War, Rome are really the upstarts, don't you think? They're not sort of the big boys on the block at all.
Not at all.
As Carthage.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Because, I mean, all of the thing that I find remarkable is how quickly Rome manages to solidify its hold on Italy and wherever else it goes. Because you would normally think that it would be, Pyrrhus comes over, they drive him off, and so the Romans are like, right, we've got the Greek southern cities of Italy, great. Now we're at war with Carthage. You would have thought that the Greeks were like, well, we don't have to stand for this. We're going to side with the Carthaginians. We're in revolt. We're going to bring over a Macedonian king or something like that. And you would have thought it would have been more difficult for Rome, but I guess the Romans were just so intimidating that they were just like, well, you better not go anywhere.
Yeah.
It's really weird to me how the Romans, because it's within a generation or two. It's not like this is a long ancestral tradition of them being subjugated to Rome or something, which you could understand, fair enough. There's been 100 years, okay, but it hasn't. There's been like 20 years, if that. And it's like, well, why are you just accepting this? You can remember a time when Rome wasn't in charge, and that could come again if you wanted, and for some reason people just didn't do it.
Yeah, it is interesting when you look at it sort of in that through that lens. I mean, Sicily, we've already talked about in other conversations how the Athenians tried to invade Sicily, like long before this.
About 150 years before this.
Yeah, and sort of obviously the Athenians failed there. But there's a long history, hundreds of years worth of different Sicilian towns fighting each other. Like Egesta would have lots of wars, many wars back and forth with other towns in Sicily. Then they would ask the Carthaginians, who were sort of the most powerful at the time, to come and help. And when you look at a map, which we'll put up in post, Sicily's not far from Carthage.
Rome,
it's sort of right in the middle, isn't it? Bang in the middle.
Yeah.
And so
it's important to note as well, it's very strategically centered. It's got it's a big island. It's a very fertile island. And so it's a great trading post and agricultural hub. to hold. So if you're going to become a dominant power in the Mediterranean, owning Sicily is a very useful thing.
Yeah. If you want to make the whole thing yours, it's almost like a linchpin in a way. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but
I don't think they'd have expended so much treasure and manpower if it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Right. Good. Very good argument.
Yeah.
I think that when you go back to sort of the 400s and the 500s BC, so a long time before we're about to start our story. There's all sorts of towns within Sicily fighting each other, and then they asked the Carthaginians to come and help. And anyway, over the course of 100, 200 odd years, Sicily, other than the east coast of it, becomes essentially under the control of Carthage, either indirectly or directly. Historians have said that had Carthage completely dominated Sicily by the time Rome's expansion got to southern Italy, the whole story might have been different, because the fact that Rome were able to relatively easily get a foothold in Sicily, that's a big deal, really, just to get a foothold. Because again, when you look at the map, Sicily and the toe of Italy is Rhegium. That's very, very close. That little strait there, extremely close. Yeah,
you can see, the thing.
It's extremely close. So, I mean, that's sort of the setup of it. I mean, Polybius talks about how you said you've been listening to Polybius recently, or rereading. I think it's really good the way he's book one, because most of the stuff we're going to talk about is book one of Polybius, and it's interesting that he opens his history. I always find it funny by sort of saying, "Why wouldn't you want to know all about this?
Yeah,
like what's your problem if you don't want to know all about the First Punic War and why it kicked off?" Doesn't he?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And he's got a wonderfully sort of condescending manner to the other historians of his own age, where he's acting like he's basically cleaning up their mistakes.
Yes, it does sound a bit like that, doesn't it?
Yeah,
sometimes.
And I quite like his attitude when he approaches it. It's like, look, I'm the best around here, so listen, and you want to know this,
because he names other ancient historians that are now lost to us, and says this guy's crap. Yeah. This guy's completely unfair and biased,
yeah.
And here's what really happened. Yeah. Listen to me.
I mean, it sounds like we didn't lose much, to be honest.
Right? Yeah.
But then we only have his opinion on it, so there we go.
I like that thing where he says it's his plan to sort of explain to everyone how Rome went from kind of nothing to the hyperpower, and he chronicles some of the other big empires that have already existed in his time, like the Persians and the Spartans and the Macedonians. And he says, like, even the Macedonians never even attempted to try and take possession of Sicily or Sardinia or Libya, which is sort of Africa, really. Still, they call North Africa Libya. And that Rome not only did it, but did it super quick. I mean, it's kind of easy. Like, I mean, I'm exaggerating there, but he kind of says that, doesn't he?
He was definitely a Romaboo, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, because he's a Greek. That's right. Polybius is a Greek man.
Slave, wasn't he?
Mate, no, I don't think so.
I'm thinking
wasn't he an archon in Athens at one point?
I thought he was. No, I must be thinking of someone else. Don't worry.
But he was extremely well connected. He was good friends with the leading aristocrats of the day, including the last Scipios.
Yes.
The last most famous Scipios, who were sort of extremely famous in their own lifetime. And he was really sort of one of their closest friends. And so he was extremely well connected, if nothing else. His history is a great one if anyone's interested in it. You can't really... Again, it's one of those things that if you're interested in the ancient world, you're going to have to read some Polybius at some point.
But it's worth your time.
Oh, of course,
He's a pleasure to read.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.